Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Move Crush Count. I am your host, Scott Joseph. Today's episode is sponsored by J&L Marketing, the digital and direct marketing agency that helps you outsmart your competition so you don't have to outspend them. I want you to check out jnlmarketing.com today so you can check out how their innovative approach will help you move the crowd, crush the competition, and count the money. Special guest joining us today, we're going to talk about storytelling. More importantly, how it can help build your brand, capture your audience's attention. I know it's hard. A lot of us out there, we get into the weeds, and when it's time to market ourselves, differentiating ourselves is not always, sometimes it's easier said than done. So our guest today is going to help walk us through that, through storytelling and how it can help us differentiate and make us stand out from the competition. So we're talking about here an expert storyteller. He's an industry leader. He's been nationally recognized. Welcome to the Move Crush Count audience, Paul Furiga. Paul, welcome to Move Crush Count.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate being with you and your audience.
Now, you guys are a well-recognized PR firm in Pittsburgh, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Talk to us a little bit about how you got started in that. What inspired you to start that?
Well, and we'll talk about my book a little bit later on. So I have the story in my book, but I spent 2 decades as a journalist covering everything from murders to the White House. And that's really a storytelling adventure because I figured it out one time. I wrote more than 10,000 stories, edited another 10,000. You're with people in the best of times, worst of times. You really learn what it takes to write a story that's a compelling narrative, right? And there used to be this thing called the journalistic ladder of success. Now I think it's a manhole into oblivion with the news business the way it's going. But to climb that ladder, you moved around a lot. My wife and I got to Pittsburgh. My dad's actually originally from here, although we're not. And we had family here and we didn't want to leave. I asked somebody to help me look for a job. It was Larry Werner. He ran the founding office of Ketchum PR, which is the largest, fifth largest PR agency in the world. And one day I was editing a newspaper, the Pittsburgh Business Times, weekly business journal. We have them in most U.S. cities. Called me up, said he wasn't going to help me. Asked him why he wasn't going to help me find a job to stay in Pittsburgh. Thought we wrote something wrong in the paper, but really he wanted me to come work for him. Now, most journalists don't like marketing people. The reason why is because they tell crappy stories and they try to get them to write stuff that's not really news. So
that's okay. Listen, not all marketing people like journalists.
Well, we'll let the audience put their comments in, and we'll collect those stories because I'm sure there's some good ones. But look, here's the thing. This is why this is important to you and to the audience. It is not the job of journalists or your customers or your employees or your investors or your partners to figure out what your story is. It's your job as a leader of the organization to uncover, develop, and share the most important story you own, the one that defines the character and nature of your organization. And so when I moved after 20 years in journalism into the agency business, I made it a personal and professional commitment to apply everything I learned about creating unique, compelling, and memorable stories to help businesses share their best stories. And as you said in the intro, Scott, a lot of times businesses aren't doing that. They're sharing the wrong story.
You know who's worst at it? Marketing agencies.
Oh, absolutely.
They're great at doing it for others, their clients. But I got to tell you, as an owner of an agency,
Yep.
You get so into helping clients when it's time to do your own thing.
Yes.
It's difficult.
Yeah. There's that old story, Scott, about the shoemaker's kids. They're always barefoot because he's making shoes for somebody else, right?
Yeah,
and that often happens in marketing. We're so busy helping everybody else that we're not paying attention to our own story. And really we should. Scott, we need to be like the chef that eats their own cooking. All right. If we're going to tell people that we have a way of doing things that's going to deliver success, isn't it human nature for the prospects and customers we're talking to say, well, where's your story? How well do you do in sharing your own, right?
So let me ask you a question. If it's so important to uncover your own best story, the one that's really going to resonate with everyone. I mean, what's the best way to do that? How does a business or a company go about that?
Well, keep it simple, but also strategic. It's it's human nature. We overcomplicate things, right? And we really shouldn't do that. Daniel Pink is out with a new book, Love Daniel Pink. And one of his critical points is, instead of having a to-do list, we should have a to-don't list. What are we not going to do, right? And so people approach this storytelling thing and they try and load 10 pounds of crap into a 2-pound bag. Please don't do that. Start here. You're the leader of the organization. What gets you up in the morning? Why do you go to work? What's the passion that's fueling your desire to make a difference, right? And then expand that process. Ask your leadership. Ask your best employees. Ask your best customers. Why do you work with our organization rather than any other choice you might have in the marketplace? Scott, what that's going to do is it's going to turn up the raw material that can help you uncover, develop, and then share your, what I call your capital S story, which that's the story that stands above all the others that we share in business, right? We may need somebody to get something done by the end of the day. That's an important story. We may have quarterly goals. That's an important story. But this is the one that defines the character and the nature of the organization, because it answers 4 fundamental questions. Why should somebody buy from you, work for you, invest in you if that's important to you, or partner with you, which is almost always important when a business is working with other businesses? Those are the things that your prospective audience, whether it's customers or prospects or investors, employees or potential employees, that's what's on their mind when they're thinking about your organization, not the bullets that constitute your features and benefits.
So we're streaming live right now to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, of course. And so if people have comments out there, we welcome those. We don't get them all through StreamYard. So it depends on what social platform comes in. So sometimes we have to go back into the social platforms after the show and answer anybody's questions they might have or respond to some comments. But we've already got one from Jeff. And I'm only showing this because growing up, I live in Louisville now, but growing up in Cincinnati, clearly a Bengals fan. I want to apologize to the audience for not doing my due diligence in bringing these Pittsburgh people into to the show. Actually, one of our favorite people in our audience, and he's been on the show, Michael Porro. He's a Pittsburgh guy too. Him and I give each other a lot of crap back and forth, so it's fun times.
Yeah.
So I assume you're a Steeler fan?
Well, there's a story behind that. I actually grew up in Cleveland, so I was a Browns.
Oh, even worse. Hey,
here's the story. Here's the story, Scott. Just like real quick. So my wife and I, we were on that journalistic ladder of success. We were in Cleveland for a year for a job, and then we moved to Pittsburgh. We moved to Pittsburgh the year that the Browns announced they were moving to Baltimore. People don't remember this, but for the first 5 years we lived in Pittsburgh, there were no Browns. So we had to become Steeler fans. If we wanted to be a football fan, now I got to tell you this, though. I was in Cincinnati the last 2 weeks speaking to CEO groups. I worked at the Cincinnati Enquirer. That was part of my 20 years history there. And I covered some of the Bengals stuff, the Ice Bowl in '81, the Kenny Anderson and Chris Collinsworth era. I was actually in the stadium the night that Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record. So, hey, I got my Cincinnati street cred. The last 2 weeks, I had a 5-way from Skyline twice.
My cousin owns a few Skyline stores.
There you go.
Actually.
See?
Yeah.
Well, so hopefully I patronized one of his.
So, all right. So talk to me. How can a business? On a surface level, I think any intelligent business owner, leader, sits there and understands the importance of storytelling, but I want to dive into more of the specifics, right?
Yeah.
How can a business effectively use storytelling to truly connect with your audience?
Well, let's start with this. And I think most of the audience will be familiar with Simon Sinek, right? So his very first book, Start With Why, was a product of a TEDx talk he did in 2009. where he uttered this quote: "People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it." And if you agree with that basic premise, and I wholeheartedly do, then you got to start with, why do you do with what you do? Okay, not what do you do. And so often in networking situations, and when I'm speaking to these CEO groups, frequently they introduce themselves with their elevator speech, and it's boring as hell. We're an online company, we do blah, 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 blah. We do feature this, benefit that, blah, 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 blah. 10 minutes later, you're like, what's that person's name? Who is she? What does he do? You can't remember, right? So you got to start with, why do you do what you do? And then in our work, there are two other fundamental thinkers, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. Jung, because he developed the concept of the collective unconscious, which in short, he believed, and research has proven this is true, that humans come pre-wired with certain stories in our brains, okay? And then Campbell developed the concept of the hero's journey, or the monomyth, which is the story type that animates such classic pop culture iconic franchises as Star Wars, right? It's like the hero who's an outcast, meets a magic man, gets something special, fights the villain, vanquishes the villain, becomes a hero in the society. Now that's the best known kind of heroic story, right? Our belief is that every organization has a heroic story, a story archetype, or a combination of archetypes that connect with the brains of those that you need to reach, right? So you got to tap into that. And then once you do, if you say, look, our organization is a group of explorers. Now I got people's attention. Now you got to pay it off. Okay? So that's who you are. Tell me how you're an explorer. We're an explorer in cybersecurity law because our firm is always on the front edge of uncovering the risks to your organization and the world of cybersecurity so that you don't have legal problems. Well, hell, I'm going to remember that firm. See what I mean?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Give us some examples of some of the best, give us the best examples, one or two, where companies have used outstanding storytelling to really elevate their brand.
Yeah. So I typically use well-known consumer brands because everybody understands them. So the three that come to mind right away: Apple, Nike, Southwest.
Yeah.
So in the case of Nike, their archetypal story is that of the champion. Now, I don't mean the champion in the sense that they're the ones who stand on top of the podium with the gold medal around their neck. If you know the history of the company, the story is that of being the champion for the people who wear their gear. Okay, starting with Steve Prefontaine in 1975, going through Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. And what they've done is they've made it possible for weekend warriors like you or me to be part of the same story as a Jordan or a Woods. Look, I'm not going to win an Olympic medal, but I can be part of the same tribe, the same story, okay, as they are. And that's how they're a champion. Southwest, they're the outlaw archetype. Whatever all the other airlines do, they do the opposite. To the extent that in recent years, if you saw their TV advertising, they'd have their ticket agents, their ramp staff, you know, the people who put the bags on the planes, literally like Robin Hood, right? Who was an outlaw, famous outlaw, like stealing bags from the bad airlines to get people on their airline, right? So there's two examples there, and I could certainly talk about Apple too.
When you mentioned Southwest doing the opposite, the first thing that came to my mind is, from this point forward, Jerry, I'm doing the complete opposite of every instinct I have. The George Costanza line from
Yeah, that's right. Great reference. Love that.
And it worked for George too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What are some of the practical strategies or techniques that businesses can use to craft their story, to effectively communicate it?
Right. The first thing is understanding the story model or models that represent your business. As I said a few minutes ago, think of what Carl Jung and many psychoanalysts after him learned, which is that as human beings, we like certain stories over and over again. This is why the Marvel comic universe is up to like film 40, and people are still paying exorbitant amounts of money to watch essentially the same narrative over and over again, right?
Yeah.
That's the way
Don't
beings.
ruin it. Don't ruin it for me, Paul. Don't ruin it.
No, I
For me.
love. I haven't seen the latest one, but I got to tell you,
Yeah.
Scott, I love the films. Okay, I love the films as somebody who's deep into story, and they're fun, right?
Yeah.
They're great entertainment, right? Some better than others, but they're all generally pretty great.
But but that's a good. This is a good. Marvel's a good example, and I'll tell you why, and I'll come right back to you so I can finish your thought on this.
Mm-hmm.
First off, I love the way Marvel, no matter what you're watching, whether it's the streaming series that are kind of the in-betweens of their movies that they have on Disney Plus, and or no matter what movie you're seeing, you can watch it independently and enjoy it and get it.
Exactly.
But man, if you watch them collectively and the way they all tie in, even the littlest things, like I'll go back and watch other ones and be like, wow, I didn't pick up on that then. But quite honestly, the most enjoyable Marvel movies for me personally were the origin stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason for that is the origin stories are the ones that are the most unique in terms of their movie, right? It's a slightly different, because you are right. It's basically the same narrative, the same similar story from movie to movie. Right. However, the origin story gives you this background. It dives a little bit deeper into things.
Yes.
And so does that itself, it might be a horrible example, but is that an example of a better story? And that's why those movies tend to do a little bit better?
Well, it is a good story. It's an essential story because every organization that the audience represents, it started somewhere doing something, and so that's a piece of the story. The way I describe it, look, even if you're not a humongous reader, we all know books have chapters. That's chapter 1, right? Yeah. But if you're the third generation CEO taking over in a family-owned business, that's not your chapter. Now, to your point, should your beginning of chapter 3, your story, while you're the CEO or you're taking the company, should there be a touchstone and a reference to the origin story? 100%, right? But this is, again, the Marvel MCU, that's how they get to 40 films. What you said, they weave all these things together. And so one of the mistakes that companies can make is they can get stuck in the wrong chapter of the story, or they can get stuck in the weeds, right? So
how do you mean? So when you say that, let's get specific on that one, because I think that could help a lot of people.
All right. You're the CEO of a 100-year-old company. It's a double-edged sword, unless you share the right story. Oh, you're in manufacturing and 100 years old. Oh, that means that you're stuck in the past. Yeah. That means you don't know anything about what's going on in manufacturing today. Or does it? Look at manufacturing over the last 50 years. It's been a crap show. You share the right story. Look, we've been from the dawn of modern manufacturing to what's happening today. You see what I mean? So it's easy to get stuck in the wrong aspect of the story. If you go to market and all your competitors are talking about the latest technology and you're just only talking about your founder and the bowler hat and the umbrella and all that stuff that defined the 1880s or whatever, you're creating a disadvantage for yourself that you don't need to create.
Yeah. What all right, we talked early when we did at the beginning of the show about how it can be used to really differentiate a business. Yeah. So how do we use storytelling if the sole focus is to create a compelling story, to get people's attention, to grab them interest, to want them to remember us and this and that? But I want to focus in on differentiating.
Yes.
All right. And the reason I say that is a lot of people in our audience, when we first started this show, it was all about helping companies and businesses that might be in a market or in a market in a market that's viewed as a commodity.
Yes.
And or the marketplace is trying to paint them in what I call this commodity corner, because when you're a commodity, the price of your services and or products tend to go down.
Yes.
There's usually a race to the bottom in terms of your
Yes,
prices.
indeed.
And obviously the marketplace wants that and enjoys it. So differentiating yourself is critical. And so give us some examples. How can someone
Mhm.
use storytelling to really differentiate themselves and demonstrate how they're showing, much more value than someone that might be selling the exact same thing down the street?
Right. So there's two things that are fundamental to start with. Number one is, and you know this because you're in digital marketing. You got to take a look at the marketplace of ideas and see what stories all your competitors are sharing first.
Yeah.
And there's a very literal, important rubber hits the road moment here. If your competitors out there and they're pounding Google with tens of thousands of dollars a month behind a particular story, and you don't pay attention to that, when you go out to the marketplace and try and tell your story, it's going to be, I'm a voice in the wilderness. You can't hear
Yep.
me. And so you got to do that. That's one thing. Then the other thing is you got to understand that your story becomes the roadmap for what you're doing, right? So it's not like it's a robotic exercise, right? So if you're an explorer, there are a million ways that you can extend that concept, and everything from social media to long form content, right? It's just got to be authentic, rooted in truth to your own company's story. So you got to examine that, right? You just can't say, oh, I want to be like Southwest because they're the outlaw. Well, what if your company's not the outlaw, right? Like if I'm hiring an accounting firm, do I want the outlaw? If I'm hiring a law firm, do I want a law firm that's led by the character frequently considered the jester? Haha, I'm funny. Haha, look what I can do here. This is mission critical stuff, right? So you got to be looking at what story everybody else is sharing, and then you got to be really honest. That's why talking to your customers and employees and leadership and looking at the marketplace, doing the secondary research is so critical before you start mucking around to actually get out there and tell your story. If you're a leader, in your heart, you have a good sense of what your story already is, right? Your gut's going to start to tell you that. But, when I was in journalism, I started in the Woodward and Bernstein era, and there was this T-shirt I had in college, and my mom didn't like it because it said, if your mom says she loves you, check it out. So look, if you think you know your story, cool, check it out.
So I want to dive into your book a little bit. And I have not read it yet, so I will make sure I purchase it. And
No
just so I make sure, and we'll put this up at the end of the show as well in the show notes. WordWrite agency. Of course, we can buy it on Amazon, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. I see one in the back there.
Yeah.
Is there a way you can bring that up into the screen so we can see the title and everything and see what it looks like? So finding your capital S story. All right. So check that book out. I'm going to assume, and I could be wrongfully assuming this, so correct me if I am wrong. All right. That there is a framework or a structure.
Yes.
That I could follow.
Yes.
To where, I don't want to say foolproof it, but pretty much dummy proof this process out, right? And so, because it's one thing for a business owner to be watching or listening to this show and say, you know what, I agree with all this. I understand the importance. It'll help me differentiate and all the benefits that come from it.
Right.
But then it's time to do it.
Yes.
And then they get back and then they don't do it because they get stuck in the same crap that they always get stuck in. So what does this structure or this process look like to get this right?
Great question. Thank you.
By the way, is that in the book?
It is in the book. Yeah.
Okay.
There's an entire chapter in the book that talks about how to do it. We have a trademark process called story crafting. This is the way it works. Over 30 to 90 days, we start with what I've shared. We sit with the leadership. What story do you think you guys are sharing? And today, great retention, great resignation, whatever the hell's going on in the employment market, right? Well, get people in the room, CEO, head of sales, marketing, HR, CFO, and just have them write down like a sentence, like what's your elevator speech on who you are and what you do? It's different. That's okay. Raw material. Sometimes the person with the best story in the room, because they're right now in the most competitive environment, is whoever's running HR. How are they going to keep employees? How are they going to get employees? Generally speaking, unless you're Apple or General Motors or Google, there's somebody out there in your industry who can pay more, has better perks. So the good news on that is the majority of the workforce, millennials and Zs, they care about that stuff, but not as much as they care about why you do what you do. Sinek has a more recent book out, his third book, called The Infinite Game. He defines a company in there as a just cause company that's attractive. It's like Jobs said he wanted to put a dent in the universe, not that he wanted to break it or knock it off course. That's the definition of a just cause company. And that's what people are looking for. So you get people together internally and you say, okay, what's the raw material for our story? Geez, Paul, I like what you said. Scott, that's a very interesting point. I haven't been sharing that about what we do. Then you ask your customers, your employees, you look what your competitors are doing, and then you come back and you identify the appropriate story model or models that define you. So for instance, for our firm, I'm in the office here in Pittsburgh, we looked at 3 archetypal stories: explorer, champion, and outlaw. And combined, those define our story model. We're explorers when we're helping our clients identify new ways to have success. We're champions for them because it's not about promoting us, it's about promoting them, kind of like Nike. And when we're hiring talent, we're outlaws because there's a lot of things that are done in the agency business, and that's not the point of this episode or this podcast, that really turn people off about working in the agency business. So we often say when we're hiring, we're the anti-agency agency. So that's how we use it, okay? And as you can see, depending upon who we're talking to, a different facet of that story will be important to them. In addition to my book, I was a co-author of a recent Amazon bestseller called Ready to Connect, Grow. And my chapter in the book is called Your Story is a Diamond with Many Facets. And it distills this concept. Your story is like a precious jewel. Treat it like that. It's the most valuable asset you own in your marketing. But you know what? The facet of it, like a diamond, that's interesting to employees or potential employees, it's probably not the same one that's interesting to your customers or prospects. That's okay. It's the same story, right? You just need to be sharing a different aspect of it to attract the right audience.
I love what you're doing on the outlaw thing, because there's some industries that don't have that, like a stigma to it, or
yes.
And I don't know if agencies have a stigma. However, if you're trying to find someone with experience, a lot of people understand that there's a lot of agencies out there where there are certain times, man, the hours are things come in past deadline or after deadline, and the work can get chaotic, and you're going to have to really burn that candle at both ends. There are just times when it happens, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I kind of like that message, but I got to tell you, my original industry where I spent the most of my career in was automotive.
Yeah.
I think that story and the way you just said it and why you said it in terms of recruiting employees, if there's ever a stigma out there, it's not like people are graduating college saying, you know what, I can't wait to go sell cars.
Yeah.
I think that's a strategy and something that the audience, if they're in automotive, they should be listening to you right now, or any other type of industry that might have a similar type of situation when it comes to hiring people. And it's a shame because the industry compensates people so well.
Yes.
It is a hidden secret. The automotive industry is a flat hidden secret. And but with the way you said that, I want that audience to pay attention to that, because I think that's something.
It's an opportunity, right?
It's a huge opportunity. And it's definitely, we talk about differentiating ourselves.
Yes.
It's a perfect example of how to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And, sometimes it's good to just kind of consider what would be the way to share my story that goes against the grain, because you don't want to be the third or fourth or fifth or 10th person who's sharing essentially the same story. That defeats the entire purpose of differentiation.
We all want our team, our employees, to share a sense of purpose, right? To have this strong commitment. We all want everybody rowing in the same direction.
Yes.
How can we use storytelling to inspire our own internal teams?
Well, uncovering your capital S story and sharing it with
Let's go. By the way, let's go into that before you answer that. I'm gonna come back to that question.
Sure.
Because I know the capital S is obviously in the title of your book.
Right.
Talk to us about that real quick.
Yeah. Okay. It gets the capital S because it stands above all those other stories that we share as leaders. I mentioned get this done by the end of the day, or here's our quarterly goals, or let's beat our earnings forecast. Those may be important to the organization, but that's not what motivates employees specifically to hey, let me help the boss get a bigger bonus this quarter. Yeah, that's not what's driving them. They're more on the plane of explain to me how I can make a dent in the universe by working with you. What's my just cause, right? And it doesn't have to be, Steve Jobsian dent in the universe. It can be something smaller or different or specific, right? But it's got to be more than, hey, here you go. Here's your paycheck. Open a vein and bleed for me, will you? That's not very motivating. And we've been through this period where it's hard to get employees. Look, we're missing the forest for the trees. There's not enough people in the generation behind boomers to replace all the open jobs. That is an institutional, long-term, systemic problem with employment, right? And if you're not sharing the best story in this limited pool of talent, you're going to have serious trouble.
Yeah, no, good point. All right, so now let's get back.
So what is it that gets, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what is it gets employees?
Correct.
It's, the best employees want the same things that you do. Not like in terms of how many zeros are in their paycheck, but they want to be in an organization shoulder to shoulder with the leaders doing something that has meaning. So the facet of the story that's most important is meaning. And if you're a founder, or even if you're a second or third generation or a hired CEO, again, what is it that gets you up in the morning and says to you as a talented leader, I'm going to work at this company today rather than any other company that could use my talents, right? That's the seed of the passion that you need to share, right? Now, it could be an innovation, the greatest thing since sliced bread, a coming of age for a product, an epiphany that occurred at the company with software or technology or whatever. But that's the passion that needs to be shared with the employees. And if you're together on a mission to achieve a goal, not a goal like how many zeros there are, but to make a difference, that's the story that employees want to see. It's the story they want to hear. It's the story they want to experience working with you.
I sit here and I watch, we're all on social media.
Oh, yeah.
We're all doing what we can to separate ourselves, rise above competitors or above the noise. And storytelling plays a big role in that. But let's talk about, because we've all watched people on social and you can just tell they're masked up.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the real person, but on social, there's just a feeling. I feel like some people have the ability to, let's take a poker player, right? They have the ability to read a person and sense whether it was something, an eye movement or a breathing pattern, whatever it might be. They can just tell that this person's not really congruent.
Yes.
What they're saying is not congruent with whether it's their facial expression, their mannerisms, how they're saying it, whatever it might be. Yeah. It's not true to them. It's not real. So let's talk about authenticity. How important when you're telling a story is that it's authentic, and it is the real.
It's crucial. It really is, Scott. We say in our work, what we've learned with, over 20 years, 250 clients, there's 3 fundamental principles. Let's say you have the greatest story in the world. Awesome. When you're sharing it, if you're not ensuring that story is authentic, and by that I mean rooted in truth, Okay, let's take the business aspect of this. Like if you and I were crossing a street downtown on our way to lunch and we saw an accident, and you were on one side of the intersection, I was on the other. We both saw the same thing, but we have a different perspective. In business, people expect choice. So it's okay with your audiences if you have a different perspective than your competitors, right? But your story, the one you're sharing, needs to be rooted in truth. The audience needs to be able to go, oh, yeah, I get that. You know, I know company A says this, but your company B, and you say that. Great, awesome. As long as it's rooted in truth. If you don't have that, you're dead. The next thing is yeah.
Let me ask you something. Is that why, in your opinion, do you think there might be some companies that do very polarizing things, make comments, maybe it's their leaders, but
Yep.
they're so true and being so true to who they are that they're okay not appealing to this market over here because they
Right.
know the more true and the more authentic they are, they're going to appeal to a higher percentage of these people. Is that
Yeah.
why that works?
Yes, it can. So the good example of that is Apple. All right. The Think Different campaign, here's to the crazies, here's to the thinkers, here's to the, from when Jobs came back to Apple back in the late 90s. Okay. They were looking for, people don't like Apple would say they're cult. Okay. Whatever. They were very specifically focused on a segment of the market. I think the unintentional example that we have today is Twitter. Okay. I've never met Elon Musk. I don't know. I know a little bit about him. You have to if you're in our business, right? But just look at the numbers. The damn thing's imploding. And I honestly do not know whether some of the things he's done that are very polarizing are intentional or not. I mean, I know some of them are, but I don't know that he intends them to be polarizing because he's been successful in so many companies, right?
Yep.
But what's happening is not the intended result, right? And to yell and scream at people, when they pull their advertising or whatever, is not, in my experience, and what do I know? I've been in the business for like 40 years total. It doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I think he's running into a situation in Twitter. It's a little bit bigger maybe than we all recognize.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when he bought the house, it wasn't in tip-top condition.
Yeah. And they started to remodel it. It's like that. I forget that movie. It's the one where they remodeled the old house.
Yeah.
Attribution.
Yes.
All right. I advertised this and I got this result.
Yes.
In today's world, in today's marketplace, with everyone doing a lot of branding, a lot of social media stuff, and all this other stuff, how do we know how do we measure the impact that our storytelling's, and is it accurate? Is there an accurate way to measure the impact?
Yeah. So, as I said, there are three fundamental principles that we see in sharing a story. Authenticity. Second is having a fluent storyteller. And look, that's not always the CEO. If you're a software company, maybe the person sharing the story sometimes should be the person who wrote the program. If you're a healthcare organization and you're trying to get people, patients, do I want the very capable CEO to be telling the story, or do I want to hear from the caregivers? Okay, so that's the second one. The third one, and boy, this is a big one, Scott. Far too often in business, people are like, this is as if they were going to California and they just jump in the car and they go, let's go to California. Well, how much are you going to spend? I don't know. Where are you going to sleep? I don't know. My competitor's on Facebook. Damn it, I need to be on Facebook. Do you? So the third pillar, you really got to make sure you're continually engaging your audience. And that starts with, where is your audience, right? At our firm, frequently we'll say, don't spend a single dollar on your marketing unless you know what it's going to get for you, right? And get rid of these vanity metrics, right? It's all about engagement, right? And the science behind this, and with MRIs and stuff now, we know today a really great story, because they'll put people in these tubes, which if you've never been in an MRI, you have to be in there for like half an hour in order to get good imaging. So I have this in my book. Uri Hassan, a professor at Princeton, he did a study about 10 years ago. He had a young woman tell her worst prom story ever. And then he put about 50 people inside a tube, and they listened to her story, and they watched the brain waves. What happened is the brain waves of those people taking in the story synced with the storyteller, right? That's what's going on here. That's what we want. But how that plays out in business is have the right social media metrics. Start with a benchmark, right? Like, what do you want to track? What's your ultimate goal? And far too often, and I don't know why this is, but very, very smart people who aren't in the marketing field will just like look at it like it's some big fluff of cotton, and they won't put any metrics around it. Damn, with the internet, we can track everything. Dwell time. When do people pop out of YouTube videos? Where's the call to action? Do they land on your website? How long are they on the landing page? Do they download? Do they sign up for your newsletter? Measure that stuff at the beginning and along the way. And you know what? If your story's not working, tweak it.
How great is digital marketing today? In the sense that
awesome. Just
remember the old days when
I do.
You had to wait a month or a quarter and see, all right, did it work? And then we're not quite sure what to change. And so we just kept changing and tweaking month to month or quarter to quarter. And now you could do it. Heck, you could do it daily. I mean, it's great.
My favorite one, and this comes from the retail end of advertising from broadcasting, is bonus coverage. You know, the first time I was in a meeting and an agency was like, and you got this much bonus coverage. And I'm like, what's bonus coverage? And it's like, well, your client doesn't have any restaurants within 200 miles of this geography, but because, you know, we did a shotgun blast and threw your advertising all over the place, people who are nowhere near one of your restaurants got to see your advertising. And I'm like, why are we paying for that? What's the point? Right? Bonus coverage. I mean, I could give you 1 million of those, but this
when we started our agency, it brings up a funny thing. So we were selling direct mail, and it was all high impact sale promotions, right? Come in for this 1, 2, 3 days. And I remember, like, if I was going to sell a prospect or re-sign a client in, say, Dallas,
right?
And back then, the newspaper got a lot of ad budget.
Yes.
Well, a full page ad in Dallas back then it could be $25,000, $35,000.
Exactly.
And I would say to people, why are you spending $35,000 to reach millions?
Yes.
When only 5,000 people care about what you're talking about right now.
Right. Exactly.
Why not take half that money, not even half, a third of that money, and just channel it to those 5,000 and do everything you can to make sure you really grab their attention, and more importantly, get them engaged and enrolled in the process and get them to show up.
Right. Yes.
So much. In some ways, there are some things I miss about the old days. It was a lot easier.
Yeah. The flip side of that is now is when we know something is working, and this is true for the whole audience, you can tell, right? Yeah. You don't have to guess anymore, right?
That's right.
Yeah, in the old days, it was kind of loosey-goosey on some things, but now you're actually gonna know. And you mentioned at the beginning of the episode that we started as more of a pure PR firm. Well, with what's going on in the news business, there's a lot of other things that we do that are critical to success. Here's one, and I wish we would have had this in the old days. But if we have, like, for instance, we were primarily for providers of complex products and services. The more difficult it is for you to explain what you do, the more we love you, because that's where our storytelling really, really helps. So you'll get an article in a trade pub, X number of people see it. Put that puppy on LinkedIn and boost it, 5 times as many people see it. It's still the same thing. People will look at the LinkedIn feed and see that, and they'll go, oh, that's an article. Wow, that must be a good company. This publication wrote an article. They don't look at that and go, they boosted this on LinkedIn, right? But here's the other part of that, right, Scott? I mean, in the old days, you'd be like, oh, well, it was in the newspaper, blah, blah, blah. But now you can be like, yeah, it was in the publication. And because we created some direct response mechanisms, we know X number of people are prospects, leads, and look, my goodness, you got a customer or a client.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when it comes to storytelling, does it work in all business or all industries, or are there certain industries that really works great in?
It really works. The more complex and more B2B you are, the better it works. And here's why. Most B2B companies need to educate before they sell.
Yeah.
Storytelling is education. Now, it is true that when most people think of storytelling, they think of Super Bowl commercials and they think of the big boys. You know, I mentioned I was in Cincinnati. There's this little company there, Scott. You know their name, Procter and Gamble. No,
Yep.
Procter and God.
Is there anything better than driving down that street when you're coming off the highway, coming in?
The Ivorydale plant. Yeah,
that is just such a nice thing there. But go ahead.
But anyway, look, they have 30 brands of toothpaste. What's the story of every brand of their toothpaste? I don't know, Scott. Colgate, Palmolive, Unilever, they have toothpaste. They have multiple brands. Walk into Target, walk into any store. They're next to each other on the shelf. There's not really any storytelling there.
No.
The storytelling that matters is the storytelling that happens in B2B. A lot of times, for example, you know, we worked with a company some years ago. They had this really cool machine. The U.S. Navy has one on every ship. If something bad happens and they need to cut anchor in like 10 seconds, one of their machines goes boom and cuts the anchor chain. You don't believe it until you see it, okay? So YouTube's great for them, right? Yeah. Because they're not only selling to the Navy, they're selling to a lot of industrial applications, right? And their idea is an innovation, the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if you just tell people about it, they're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you're like, want to see it in action? They did a trade show once where they set it up so that remotely at the trade show, people could operate the thing and cut the metal at a distance. Wow, was that fun? So yeah, the more
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me ask you this question. So are there different ways that you have to kind of adapt the story?
Yes.
Let's say, all right, you know, I want to communicate on social media, or maybe I'm at a trade show and I'm speaking on a stage, or I'm doing video content, whatever it might be. How do you do that?
Okay. So I mentioned your story's a roadmap. We use a tool at our firm we call a message pyramid. So think of a pyramid that's on its point. Okay. So now imagine that you're in a one-to-one conversation with somebody. Hey, Scott, nice to meet you. What do you do? You start with a very strategic, simple description. What do you want people to do in a conversation? You want them to say, tell me more. Okay. So what happens with the message pyramid is you got the overarching statement. And then as you get deeper, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. The problem in business is too often we go down to the tippy point there and we find the really technical, jargonese, marketingese bullet, and we start with that. Don't start there. Start with the story. And as you draw people into the conversation, because really, all good sales should be a conversation. All good marketing should be a conversation. When they want to know more, they'll ask. And then you've got the content right there. You can pull them in deep.
I feel like I'm on repeat from episode to episode. I talk about the importance of building strong relationships. And it's important because I recognize it as a big mistake that I made early in my career. The first half of my career, it was all about us, focused on us. I wasn't worried about, we can do that ourselves. And man, you can just get to wherever you want to go, higher and faster, building strong relationships, whether it's through clients or even, you know, partners that you work with. And so my question is, how can we leverage storytelling to build stronger relationships, and really even foster, like, you know, some client loyalty as well?
Absolutely. So everybody needs to be a character in the story. Now, I won't necessarily say the hero. There is a lot of thinking in marketing that the customer is always the hero. I don't think that's true. It is true many times, okay? Yeah. But They want to be part of the story. Like me and Nike. I don't want to, I'm not capable of winning an Olympic gold medal. Okay. I'm not going to be Michael Jordan. As my daughter's basketball coach used to say, you can't teach tall. I ain't that tall. I'm not that talented. But hey, I can be part of the story. I can wear the same gear. I can have my Air Jordans, like the recent movie that came out, right? I can be part of the story. So folks need to be in the story. There needs to be a place for them, right? Again, healthcare, right? Who's the hero? If I need open heart surgery, am I the hero? No, I'm in the story, but the hero better darn well be my surgeon, right? Doc, heal me, right? So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about creating an inclusive narrative. And yes, stories have a common arc. There's a problem, there's rising action, there's a climax, and there's a resolution. Okay, fine. Again, don't get caught up in the weeds. There's not only one story to tell, right? Your story as an organization can have multiple chapters, right? Because you invent one product, it does great, the market changes, now you need to invent another product. So that's another chapter of the story, right? Or maybe accidentally, like 3M, you invent Post-it notes. That's a chapter in the story. Yeah, we were trying to do this other thing, and we invented this other stuff. Want it?
A good point. What is there anything we haven't talked about that you feel like the audience needs to know or would benefit from? I could keep going on and on. I find I say this a lot too. I just assume my audience, our audience here at Move Crush Count is all just exactly like me, and so I find it challenging, to communicate. It's funny. I talk to another agency or something like that, and I tell them this, and they're like, "Well, why don't you just do this, this?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that was so simple." It's like I just get caught in the weeds when I'm communicating ourselves, and so I find sometimes it's better when I remove myself from that process and let some people come in and do it. But is there anything we haven't talked about that you thought, audience really needs to understand this? I'd love to hear that from you.
So the thing about storytelling, there's two sides to it. One, a lot of people are like, storytelling, it's like breathing, it's everywhere. That is true. But that's also a benefit, right? When the first person, Scott, who made a fire on purpose, figured out how to do that, how do you think they told the next person what to do? They shared a story. So it's in our biology, right? So don't overcomplicate it. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're watching or listening, storytelling is baked into you as a human being. You don't have to dress up like some Civil War veteran or play Mark Twain on the stage to be a good storyteller. Connect with the passion that inherently exists in you. What is your why? Why, as the leader of your organization, do you do what you do? Why does your organization do what it does? Start there. Don't overcomplicate it.
All right. So I'm going to add another question. I was sitting here and I just happened to look down at your name and I see the WordWrite next to it. And the WordWrite is what made me think about it. I would be doing a disservice if we didn't at least briefly bring this up. Talk to me about what you like and don't like quickly, what you like and don't like about ChatGPT or any of the other AI tools that are out there.
Great research tools, fascinating opportunity to do things more quickly that we couldn't do before. What concerns me is over-reliance on it.
Okay. Has it impacted your agency at all? To me, I think the agencies that embrace it and get good at using it,
I agree,
are going to be the ones that excel up. I mean, it's
the talent crunch, Scott, that we talked about earlier in the episode. It affects everybody, including people in our business. So get with the program. You're never going to have enough people to do everything you need to do. And I don't care what business you're in, There is some level of research or drudgery that Chat GPT and its cousins can help you with, right? Just don't over rely on it. It's in its infancy, right? But we still need people to make it go.
Well, this topic, storytelling, is one of my favorites. I love when we talk about it on Move, Crush, Count. So that's a wrap for this episode. Incredible job, Paul. I really think this was just, you got into some specifics here. You gave us the frameworks. If you haven't, can you hold your book up one more? If you're listening, and not watching, we'll have this in the show notes. But if you're watching, obviously, Finding Your Capital S Story, get on Amazon right now and buy that, have that shipped to you. If this episode is any indication as to what you're going to learn from that book, I think that's something you want to make the decision on and do right away. I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you helping the audience. And quite honestly, I tell people all the time, I started this show because I wanted to give back and expose people to a lot of the people that I know and that have helped me and or have access to. But the side benefit that I forgot, I go back to my early days in business when I was interviewing and getting mentored by people, is all the things I learned from doing these interviews. And I'm like, I sit here and I take notes on my note paper, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I got to make sure I remember that. Did a lot of that today. So I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
And I want to also thank our Move, Crush, Count audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your peers. We don't promote the show. We grow it organically. So sharing it, rating us, reviewing us, all of that helps. If you review us, we pay attention to those comments. So we're always trying to improve. We do live stream on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. Make sure that you do, anytime you see those live streams, you tune in so you can stay in touch with the community. And you can always subscribe to us at movecrushcount.com and on YouTube. That way you can catch up on all past episodes and never miss a future one. So I want to do a special shout out to our sponsor, J&L Marketing. They are the digital and direct marketing agency that helps you outsmart your competition so you don't have to outspend them. Check out jnlmarketing.com today so you can check out how their innovative approach will help you move the crowd, crush the competition, and count the money. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoyed this show a lot, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Scott.